Okay, well, here we are in week 3 at the center point of this course, and we're moving forward. So, let me just say here, I know that many of you are overwhelmed and confused, and this is normal. This is part of the process, unfortunately, because research is such a different concept than your normal classes. However, hang with me here, continue to keep asking questions. Also, please reach out to me so we can set up a time to meet, do a Google Meet one-on-one so I can answer any questions, concerns that you have as well. You just know that you can do that at any time so that I can assist you. Let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull my notes over here just a moment because I have a lot here. Again, one thing I've realized in this class, because there are so many students, so many questions, um, there is a lot to go through, and I've realized that I cannot answer every single question at this point. So I'm going to try to run through a good number of these. Some of them crossed over, and so hopefully that will help you. Um, and then we'll just continue to move forward here. So let me start first of all with the quiz from this last week and some of the questions. The first question was, what question do I have about experimental designs? So one question was, what happens if the control group fails? Can the study be saved? Now, I'm not sure about the thought context of the question when asking about failure of a control group, but you can invalidate control groups. A control group is the group that stays the same. You have an experimental group and you have a control group. This control group does the same thing that it's always done. So the intervention that you're experimenting with is the experimental group. Now, how can it be invalidated? Say there are different situations that can happen, say where for whatever reason, maybe the control group is aware of the experimental group and then just continue and starts to adapt to that. So if people in your control group are aware of what's happening with the experiment, that can affect the way that they see it, and they may posture themselves towards that, and then that will invalidate your control group. There are just a number of different measures in which the control group can be invalidated, not staying consistent, just different things like that. And so, a couple of things that can help with that is one is double blinding. Um, and let me just explain because someone asked about the double blinding as well. Double blinding means that I, as the researcher, knows does not know who is in the control group, and neither do the participants know who's in the control group and who's in the experimental group. So what does that mean then? If I don't know and neither does the two groups, that means that there has to be an individual person that is working with you that does all of this and knows all of this, but you don't and they don't. And that person, that separate person, does not work with the experiment itself. And they may later help to analyze, but in that moment and in that space where the research is being conducted, they are not a part of that. So that is what's considered double blind. Another one, let's see, that I had here, I wanted to talk about, is the randomly assigning participants to the experiment and to the control groups, rather than us looking at a select group and saying, okay, you're going to be the control group, you're going to be the experimental group, um, that you take, and what you can do is you put, let's say, numbers and codes beside each person, and then you take those codes, and you save those. You take the codes, then you put them in a hat, and you have someone draw out or something to that effect, and then each are selected to go to a control and an experimental group, and then that way, I mean, you don't know necessarily. They might know, or the other way around. But the fact of it is that, or you can actually even look at it once it's been done and you can know who's in each group, but you're not purposely placing them. It's a random draw so that you don't put any bias into it, especially if you know the people. That's how it could be invalidated as well. So to go back to, if the control group is invalidated, can the study be saved? Most likely not. So that's why we have to work on the front end of that, just to make sure that we aren't in some way invalidating our control group. Um, how do we know which are the right variables for experimental research? Those variables will come all in the forming of the concept, the framework, the conceptual framework that you will do in your own topic. And so that all comes on the front end. And then you would have to determine if there are other dependent variables that may affect it. Well, then you have to look and figure out how to eliminate those variables. Um, are there average and maximum amount of variables? Usually you just want to do one or two at the most, in independent variables is all that you want to do. So remember, in experiments, you have independent variables and you have dependent variables. I know that a lot of this doesn't make sense right now, but basically all we're doing here is just giving you just a simple dose, a simple view, and just a simple um, just awareness of the experimental research, just as we will do in these weeks throughout all of these. There are many questions that can't be answered here, and so if you decide to do an experimental study for your own topic down the road, then that's when we will go further into each one of these. So how do you account for personality variance? And then another question had asked, is averaging scores enough to account for differences in personality in a controlled group? If not, how would a study do that? So first of all, I think part of it depends on if the study, um, if the personality would affect that study. So if, say, if they're in a factory and they're doing a job and they've been doing it the same exact way, same method, every step through the way, and they just automatically do it. There's nothing like an assembly line or something, and there's nothing that changes there, and their personality doesn't necessarily come into that. Then your personality may not be a factor or a variable. However, let me back up and then say the experiment is that we want to use a different method. Um, and so the people are instructed to, rather than doing it these steps, do it these steps. That would be experimental. Your personality may not come into that. Um, but if you do an experiment that has to do with the perspectives on something, their beliefs on something, and how that changes, or how they would see to do something, where they have any consideration of, where maybe it takes being assertive, and certain personalities lean more towards passivity, or it takes being outgoing and charismatic, and some personalities are not that way, or taking charge and not taking charge. So see how those kinds of experiment, your personality comes into effect with that. And so can you just average scores to account for differences in personality? You would not have a very valid study. It would not really answer what you're needing to answer if you did that. So how do you account for personality variance? In those studies, a lot of times, what has to be done is on the front end. If you know that personality is going to be one of those dependent variables that can affect it, then what you need to do most likely is take and say do personality tests at the very beginning when you're determining your sample group. And if you know, say it requires, say it requires being very assertive. Some personalities are not; they're very laid back. Then you have, if you take that personality test, then you have that you can account for as you go through your experiment, that you can say these personalities, this is how they scored in comparison to these personalities. So that can compare, and that can give you um, a greater guide for your experiment. Um, or sometimes you can actually take in and decide, I'm only going to use this type of personality that is more assertive. So that's how you would account somewhat for the personality variance. Just know that in experimental studies, there is no way to completely rule out every single nuance of every single variable. The goal is that we want to rule out as much as possible. And if they're very, very glaring ones, then we have to figure out how to rule it out or how to account for those. So, next question was, what do I see as potential participants in my topic? This I'm not sure if I worded that incorrectly or not. I had a couple of people who thought this was for this experimental study that you were doing, but the question was more for your participants in your own study that you're considering doing down the road. So if you answered it according to the experimental, that might be why I made the comment or feedback that you got with that. Next question was, what concerns do I have that I lack understanding of regarding the different parts of the sample that I gave you? This question, very obviously, there was a lot of misunderstanding on this question. And because of that, I went back and listened to my own video and realized I could have been much clearer in how I communicated this question. um, and so nobody was penalized for not answering this according to my thinking that I did not communicate well. What I was talking about was, there is the sample design that has the 4 different parts, and let me pull that up just quickly. I had it here, so that way I am not so that way we are on the same page here. Let me see if I'm going to find it back. I should have taken and I pulled it up here, and now I'm not finding it. So I'm going to have to look back through that in a moment. Anyways, it was the sample design that has the different parts that I talked about last week for you to use as your as an experimental research guide. So with that, a number of you thought I was talking about a sample for your research, whether it was the theoretical experimental research we were practicing this last week to decide how I would theoretically do it, or if it was your own topic. I was actually just asking what questions you had about the different parts of that sample. And unfortunately, I'm going to need to pull it and find it back here somewhere. Um, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that here as quickly as I'm trying to go through this. Oh, right there it is. So in this, you have 4 different parts here. You have your research question, you have your research design, you have your methodology, and then you have your analysis. Those different parts was of this sample. This is a download that was in your instructions there. So this is a sample of the 4 parts that you needed to go through in your experimental design, of creating an experimental design here. That's what I was asking about in that question. What questions do you have? And like I said, a number of you misunderstood that. So let me just ask some questions here, or answer some questions on this. One question was, I am concerned about my ability to evaluate and manage the different variables within a study critically. I think I lacked practice in this sort of analysis. Let me just say that um, the experimental study is about the only kind of research that you're going to do that you have to worry about different variables, okay? Because you don't do experiments in all the other different types of research that you conduct. Only in this one, where you have an intervening variable, intervening thing that you want to test. So it's only in the experimental study that you have variables that you have to worry about ruling out, or acknowledging and doing something with it. Okay. So with that said, though, let me just answer this to the experimental study here. When it says, when this person said they think they lack practice in this sort of analysis, figuring out the variables and knowing how to evaluate the variables and manage the variables is actually on the front end. And this is a practice. It's learning, and it's being able to start looking at all the different angles of it. And it's a process as you begin to formulate your conceptual framework as you were working on this last week. And so in that, as you continue to move forward, and then if you were doing this by chance, in realistically as your study and doing an experimental, you would also rely on your literature review you would have done, so that way there'd be certain aspects that would come out. Then you would recognize those are variables as well that you need to take into consideration. So all of that is on the front end. Analysis is on the back end after you've actually done your experiment. Okay. But again, variables are only in if you choose to do an experimental study rather than one of the other ones. Um, so other questions, let's see, that were asked. How do I find practical studies for my topic of choice? It seems much easier to conduct studies for research in academia than it does for ministry and life. Again, I would encourage you to use your Logos software. You can go to EBSCOhost. They have the different ministry, religion ones, things like that. You can go to, if you have ProQuest, a way to get into that, you can go in there, and they have all these different databases. Now, what I mean by databases is, when you go into different resources, different libraries, there's like religion databases, there's education databases, there's psychology databases, there's legal, there's ethical, there's on and on and on. Thousands of different databases. Depending on that library and what they purchase and they own, will depend on what options, what database options you have. And so you choose the databases that go into the ministry and the religion. Logos, you have a Logos, with your being a student, that is going to be very helpful. You can also go into, like Google Scholarly. Just type in Google Scholarly. Now you're going to get the regular academia as well, but you can also get the religious ones within the academia for ministry and that kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps you with that. How do qualitative and quantitative research studies vary? I'm not going to answer this directly here because we will go into qualitative studies this week, and we'll also look at quantitative studies in the weeks to come too. There's concern and self-doubt about the larger scope of research, not feeling prepared to begin creating research questions, starting studies, forming this overall projects. Can doubts and indecisiveness limit capacity to continue in the course? Yes, yes. Let me just say this, if I've not said it before. In research, You have to trust the Lord, trust yourself, trust me as your professor to guide you, and trust the process. If you are doing the work that you're doing, even though it's confusing right now, and you're continuing on and you're staying in communication with me, doing the work, heeding my feedback, um, asking further questions, setting up an appointment with me to meet, to talk through a lot of things like that, you will get through it and it will become clearer. It's just that, again, it's a completely different way of thinking and processing and critiquing and now analyzing, evaluating all of that. But if you sit in the self doubts and you sit in the concerns, you will often either run away and quit, or you will shrink back and just not really pay attention to it. So it can limit you. I'm here to even help you to address and to work with those places that you're overwhelmed, to help you to find new avenues to keep moving forward with it. So just so you're aware of that. Um, is there a number of participants that makes a study more accurate, or is it just as many as a person can get to fulfill the role they need? No, there are some kind of guidelines, but we will go into that into the next course, so you're aware of that. You don't need to worry about that right now. How should a researcher avoid having their personal biases impact their selection of participants or the questions on the pretest? That is an excellent, excellent question. We will go into more next course of working on acknowledging, recognizing our own biases and our own assumptions, recognizing them and acknowledging them, and that those will actually be part of your capstone paper as we begin to write that in the next course. But all that will be acknowledged, and then we look at, okay, how can I then effectively be aware of my biases enough? How do I counteract those to make it as objective as possible? And so to answer some of these things, we would need to work on a as you get along in that, and then I can personally work with you on those. um, how far along in the thinking process should we be on our research work? Hesitate to state anything conclusively. Still much processing the reading material that has been assigned. Um, your personal, what you intend to conduct. So what you should be doing in this course. Let me just say this. Um, you have you have your topic that you need to be considering, and you need to, this week, which we'll talk about in a minute, begin collecting sources for your generalized topic and start formulating and kind of honing in on that topic. So you need to be doing that. You need to be considering your topic, and do I have valid entry, I believe valid entry to participants that I can draw in for my research to conduct research on. So do I have accessibility to them? And so these are the processings you want to consider as you're in this week, as well as honing in on what is your topic, a narrowed aspect of that topic. That has to be considered. And then you're collecting your sources, so that way you're going to be well prepared to go into the next course. So your sources you're gaining are going to help you to kind of start gaining more of an idea of your topic as you kind of glance through them, and it's going to prepare you for the next course. Okay, you do not have to do anything with these sources right now. As far other than the annotated bibliography, let me clarify on that. You are not having to actually prepare your conducting research, deciding how you're going to do research at this point. You cannot prepare for that. You cannot do that right now. So you know that. So let's get into this week. Let me start with, let me just back up here for a moment. From this point forward, I want every one of you to see yourself as a researcher. Rather than just a student, I want you to see yourself as a researcher. You are a researcher who is in study, is what you are. And so, what that means then is that there's a professionalism, there's an academia in that, that you are no longer using personal language. You're no longer using, I think, I believe, personal opinions. We're not using first person in our writings. We're using third person and we're writing as objectively as we can. So just realize that. And then as you see yourself as a researcher and you begin thinking about conducting research and learning about the different types and then doing your own research, you think about who's going to be your audience that you will be writing your capstone to. Who will they be? Yes, you're doing that for an assignment for me, but I'm just your professor. Okay. I give you the grade, but I'm not the audience that you are writing to. So you want to know who's your audience that you are writing to in there. Um, and then let me explain to, I think there was one or two that's a little bit confused. All of the exercises in the different types of ways that we will collect data, conducting research, collect data is all an exercise of practice. Okay, so it is like having a menu. These are the different, we'll go over the overarching as we're doing different types of research that there is. There is qualitative, there's quantitative, and there's mixed methods. This means it's just different ways that we collect that data. All right. Within each overarching one, there are different ways to do that. It's like a menu that you have. And so, right now, all we're doing with these exercises is we're choosing one or another off each of these menus for you to practice and gain an idea of. You are not to look at this as this is how I have to conduct my study. You are not looking at that. So this last week we did an experimental study. Nobody, so far I've not had anybody do experimental study for their own when they got down into the next class. You don't have to. It's more just learning the different ones. So just recognize that. Everything you're doing as exercises here are theoretical. You are looking to formulate the whole conceptual framework, is what you're doing. So, here, let me just say for the qualitative research this week, we're looking at the overarching qualitative research. What does that look like? So, as mentioned, there are three main approaches to research: qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. This week, we're looking at qualitative. Um, let's see. So, let me see where I want to go to try to cut some of this down so I'm not going too long here. Qualitative research. The key to understanding qualitative research lies with the idea that meaning is socially constructed by individuals, that in through interaction with the world, with each other, and all of that. And so, because of that, we find that qualitative research has just changed drastically. Um, our research in itself, no longer do we just look at objective things, stats and things like that, but now qualitative research we realize is very subjective. It's very controversial, but it's also very subjective because it goes by people's experience, their understanding, all of that. So researchers strive to understand the meaning that people have constructed about their world and their experiences. The researcher is the primary instrument for data collection and analysis rather than, say, a survey. It's usually the researcher doing interviews. Um, the product of the qualitative interview is usually rich, descriptive in words and pictures rather than statistics and numbers. And then it said that qualitative research actually goes much deeper uh, to greater understanding, being able to describe it more, versus the quantitative, which we will go into in another week, that is more statistical and it goes wider rather than deeper. There's three main sources for qualitative data collection. There's interviews, observations, and documents. Now for this week, you'll be creating a qualitative study. And again, you had the sample design of an experimental research paper there, sample. So you're going to take those same 4 parts, all right? You're going to take those same 4 parts of, let me go through it again, research question, your research design, your research methodology, and your analysis. So this time, you're going to look at qualitative research. Within qualitative research, remember we have 3 overarching. Underneath, there's all different ways. Sometimes there's like a narrative. There can be, see if I can pronounce this right, phenomenological. There can be case studies, all kinds of different types of ways to collect data and to formulate your research under qualitative. Okay, so you'll see that in your reading. You'll kind of look at those. You will want to decide which one you think you might like to theoretically create. Okay, and so then you're going to fit into all of these. You're going to fill out all of these 4 sections. In addition to this, we're going to take and add an ethics section after your analysis. So you're going to add ethics to it. You're going to assess the potential for any disrespectful or harmful things that could happen. You're going to assess any potential for physical or psychological, any kind of harm that could come to that person. You're going to identify possible benefits to the participants and others, and you're going to assess implications of funding. Is funding a part of it where they get paid, where there's rewards, things like that? And how does that come into effect? Are there ethical issues with that or not? And you want to do this to your particular study that you decide you want to create. So there's all of that for the qualitative study. The second assignment is building an annotated bibliography. You'll have the guidance of that in your handbook. So please be aware. The one thing I want to make you aware is that in this, you want to make sure every one of your sources are in alphabetical order. And then if there's any other questions, let me know. Just just get back with me and all of that. So for the questions this week, and again, I forgot to write some quiz questions. So let me go ahead and write these down here. And we're going to say again, what qualitative question do you have? Okay. What do you see as the difference between qualitative studies and the experimental study that we did last week? What questions, see if I can get this clearly communicated this time. What questions do you have about the sample design with the 4 parts? And then I'm adding the 5th. What questions do you have about the sample design? The research question, the research design, the methodology, the analysis, and now the 5th part, the ethics. What questions do you have for me on that? And then number 4 and 5, what other questions do you have outside of that? What other places can I assist you with? So answer those. Be sure and write the question down first that I give you. And then you answer it with your question or your statement or your concern or whatever you feel like you need to share with me about that particular thing. So if there's nothing else, God bless you. Have a great week. Oh, happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Please take Thursday, enjoy it with your loved ones. I pray blessings upon you. If this is a hard year, a hard season for you, please feel free to let me know. I will be praying for you. I know that it can be difficult, very painful places, and I will be praying for you. And I just pray that you have a great um, time with the Lord and a place of healing and just experience His love and others around you. So have a great week. God bless you, and I will see you on the discussion board.